Is that my cue to go?
Yes, go ahead. Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for joining this morning. My name is Charity Davenport. I am currently an instructional technology specialist focused on accessibility at Pellissippi State Community College. We'll talk a tiny bit about accessibility in this presentation, but a lot of my experience here, I'm going to be talking about my time. Where's my slide? Give me my slide. My time, my past life as an ESL instructor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I should say Pellissippi State is in Knoxville, Tennessee. But I was an ESL instructor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for 13 years. I am also a huge Latin nerd. I took both, AP Latin exams in high school to get my language requirement finished when I went to college. And then also decided to get a master because I like languages. I got a master's in teaching English as a second language, which fit very well. And then I also like technology. So I got another master's. I'm just going to collect all the masters in instructional technology. And because we're talking about OER, I am going to, refer to Creative Commons licenses. So I have 2 masters, but I am not a lawyer. So just that disclaimer. So I will be talking about my OER textbook that I made for advanced ESL students. It took a long time. I think a lot of the reason I wanted to do this presentation is because we don't, or at least when I've gone to OER conferences, I haven't heard a lot about different people's processes in making OER. And I had a little bit of a struggle and a journey. So I kind of want to share the struggles so that other people can maybe avoid some of the things that I've done so it's a little bit easier for them. It took a long time and many iterations to make my OER textbook. It's essentially just a collection of different Creative Commons license works, because it's focused on Greek mythology. There's a lot of stuff I use from the public domain, and then some stuff that, I couldn't really find. I decided, okay, I'm going to write a few of these chapters on my own. It is available online in Pressbooks. If you search for It's All Greek to Me, it's also in LibreText. And I have a very beautiful and inaccessible PDF format, and also maybe a Word document because there needs to be an editable version. And so that is the wonderful product. But then how did we get here? So my first question to everyone is, have you ever created an OER and why? Why would you do such a thing? So you can answer in the chat, you can unmute. I'll give a few minutes for that, or a few seconds. Because what I wanted for my students didn't exist. Absolutely. That was a big reason for me making my textbook as well. Write what you want to read. Yep. Yep. And yeah, I think when I was working on my OER textbook, just for, English as a second language in general, I know it's growing because I see different ESL publications being made openly available, but it's really hard to find. And I feel like English as a second language, it really depends on the students. It depends on their, English level. It's a nice tailorable kind of field, but it's really hard to find some materials and ones that are kind of authentic, I think was the piece. You know, there's always the kind of robotic, kind of fake, easy sounding, like beginner English. And I really wanted to make something that was like authentic. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the steps of how I made my OER textbook. And so the first one was just to have an idea. So as I mentioned, you know, I love Latin, Greek stuff, especially Greek mythology. And I was teaching one day, and you know, sometimes in the textbook or the readings, sometimes it'll have idioms or usage, and it's like, okay, my students aren't going to know what it means to open Pandora's box. So instead of just explaining that to my students, oh, here's what it means, having a story about vocabulary or having a story behind the idioms, the culture of, you know, this vocabulary, I think sticks in students' brains way more than just explaining it to them. So I started researching more into etymology since I'm interested in languages and like, you know, which myths go with different vocabulary? Why do we have this usage? And then, yeah, how can I make this fun and introduce these stories to my students? It's difficult because I was working at an IEP, an intensive English program. They are usually very focused on academic English to prepare students for entering the university. So they do more stuff like sciences, history. And so we didn't really have a lot of opportunities to read fiction or novels or literature. But even before this, I found value in that, and I was already using novels in the classroom, but kind of alongside the textbook, and that can be kind of tricky, which we'll talk about later. So I did my research, and I had all these different words and all these different stories associated with the words. I was like, okay, I need to build themes. I need to make different units to put all the related words together, like Trojan horse. There's a lot from like the Iliad and like war stuff. So there's a whole, I was like, okay, or like adventure, the hero's journey, even the concept of the hero's journey, I think is really, you know, an interesting thing for students to learn about and learn more about culture and universal themes. So adventure, you know, the concept of, you know, death, the underworld, love stories, and of course, like some of these are just, a lot of vocabulary is just coming from the names of different Greek and Roman gods. So there's an introduction part too. So here's my crazy notes of me trying to figure out how to kind of like make like units, like weekly units that I would introduce to students. And as I mentioned before, so we didn't really have any choice of textbooks that we used. We were just kind of assigned one. And sometimes, you know, depending on the students, they didn't really match their level. It could be too difficult, it could be too hard. You know, they're not engaging. Um, and that was initially why I started supplementing with novels to maybe bring in something more interesting. You're not going to learn, especially you're not going to learn English if you don't really find the content engaging. So yeah, traditional textbooks were not meeting my classroom needs. I was using supplemental materials. I feel like literature was just not valued, even though it's extremely valuable in learning a language. And even though I tried to bring in novels and literature, we were still required to use the textbook. And so for me, it was fun to be able to finally bring in, literature and interesting things, but then that's extra work for everybody. It was extra work for me to try to build in that class time. And it was extra work for students. Usually what I ended up doing was we would do the textbook stuff during class, and then the literature readings would be the homework. And then also it's confusing because why do we have two different topics? Why are we learning about the Brazilian rainforest in the textbook, and then we're also reading The Wizard of Oz? What is the connection? It didn't make any sense. So, as I usually do, I decided I'm not gonna use I'm not gonna use the required textbook. We're just gonna read these Greek mythology stories that I've collected. So I told students, hey, the textbook that you got, we're not going to use it. We also had a very strange system where, usually students go to the bookstore and they purchase their textbooks for class. We were the bookstore. And so they paid us a flat fee of like $200 for all their textbooks. First day of class, we handed them their textbooks. So I basically told my students, we're not using that textbook. We're going to use my materials. So it's kind of like you're just paying for me to print these things out slightly illegally. Honestly, students didn't really have backlash for that because I think they knew that the textbooks were not so exciting. But my director really didn't like that. So I kind of, especially the fact that it was not academic. So I kind of did a little bit of a compromise where what I would do is we would read a story from Greek mythology, and then I would find, an article from the Washington Post, New York Times that used or focused on something from that story. So for example, we would read about the story of Narcissus and Echo. And then I would find an article about narcissistic personality disorder. So then at least there was a connection between the academic material and the literature that we were reading. And they got to see like a real world usage of the story that we talked about in class. And my students loved it. Especially because we were reading like real news articles. It was very authentic. They said, I felt like I was part of an actual university class. And it was a lot of fun. But as I mentioned, I was just like photocopying random chapters from different kinds of books and putting it together, making my own little lesson packets. I really wanted, I didn't like, oh, here's the photocopies of this week's, readings here. I punched 3 holes in them. Please put them in your notebook. And I was like, I would rather, if this is replacing their textbook, I would like it to be more like a real textbook. So I met with a course packet representative, and they said, oh, it would cost $200. And that is the opposite of what I wanted to hear. I was like, well, I'm putting a lot of energy into this thing, and I think it's pretty cool, and students think it's pretty cool, but I've kind of created a monster, a hydra-headed monster that I can't share. And so I was thinking, I was trying to, find ways to basically, how could I replace my course packet monster, bit by bit to at least lower the price. And I remembered hey, there's stuff that's not copyrighted anymore because it's old. And these stories are really old. And a lot of the art and, the statues about these stories are really old. So I started pulling, stories from the public domain that helped lower the cost. I really like pictures. I think having, art and pictures brings those stories alive. It can help with, talking about culture, how it's related to, these stories. And I use Wikipedia a lot, and Wikipedia will give you the Creative Commons license for those images, for photos. And I was like, oh, I keep seeing these little adorable CC symbols. What is that thing? And I started realizing, oh, it's related to copyright. And it seems like they're relinquishing some permissions when it comes to copyright. So my next step was, I don't know anything about this. I'm going to go to the library for more help. I think this is an interesting thing because I feel like me making this textbook is kind of, I did it in reverse order than most people do. Usually they just go to the library, or they find out, OER stuff is usually associated with the library. You go there to find more resources. That was kind of later in my process. But that librarian was super excited about my project, and I felt much more supported in my uh, crazy goal of trying to make a textbook for everyone to use. So after learning about, Creative Commons licenses, I basically had to start over. um, like I said, just like, I think another thing is people think like, oh my gosh, how can you make a whole textbook? Didn't that have to take a lot of time and a lot of effort? And it's like, yeah, but like I didn't do it all at once. As an ESL instructor, already making supplemental materials all the time. I just did, one reading, one lesson, one thing at a time, piece by piece, and started trying to replace that course packet material one piece at a time. It made it so much more manageable. I did take a semester off. I had accumulated a lot of annual leave. So I took that leave for a whole 8-week semester. We had 8-week semesters to kind of like catch up on trying to start over on this. My course packet thing originally was in iBook Author, and it didn't look pretty. So I was trying to find like an open source tool that would make it look pretty. And I found out about LaTeX, which is basically coding formatting instead of using like a Word document. So my textbook is very pretty, but I do not recommend that. LaTeX is usually used for like math equations and engineering stuff, and not for making pretty, beautiful textbooks. But I do know LaTeX code now. um, but I felt, even though I had to start over, I felt so free knowing about the Creative Commons licenses and like what I could do. And it was so much fun trying to find, pictures, which of these stories has, the vocabulary I need, the story elements that I need, but then knowing that I can edit it. I could put together, different parts of different stories together. Especially for ESL, I could use, vocabulary analysis. This COCA, what is it? The Corpus of Contemporary American English. It's basically like a giant text analyzer. It'll tell you like how frequently we use vocabulary, because using stuff from the public domain, they use a lot of words that we don't really use anymore. So I was able to kind of update the language, have more useful vocabulary, and also checking, again, going back to that, the fight between academic English and literature. And I found that a lot of the, academic vocabulary that's used in ESL textbooks actually happen pretty frequently in the literature. So they were getting that academic vocabulary, even though they're reading literature. And then last, because I was just using it lesson by lesson, on the fly, I could get student input. I was using it, piloting it, making edits as needed. When students, sometimes students were like, why are we reading this? And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna make one of the introduction pieces about why. Why are these important? How is it related to learning English? And then making, worksheets, the exercises, vocabulary exercises. And then if they had trouble with, understanding a paragraph, it's like, what does this paragraph mean? I can edit it to make it more readable for those students. So it sounds like a lot, but it was actually pretty fun. And being able to use it in the moment was very helpful. So my work was getting really popular at the institution that I was working at. And one of the instructors said, hey, I want to try, I love Greek mythology stuff too. I want to try it out. And I was like, well, I definitely need feedback, just because, I made it, it's working for me. I want to make sure that this is something that can work for everybody. But I feel like our instructors were kind of addicted to textbooks. They didn't really make lesson plans. They would just come in and it's like, oh, hi class, let's go to page 32 and just go page by page in the book. So, I didn't have, I had so many supplemental materials and I tried to tell instructors, like, this is flexible. There's no way that you're going, there's 4 stories and there's 4 articles in this unit. There's no way, you're going to have enough time to finish this whole unit in 1 month. You don't have to do the whole thing. You could pick which stories you like the best. And, they didn't really know how to deal with going through a textbook and actually having some flexibility. So I had to maybe kind of rearrange things with that. I initially had vocabulary exercises after the reading because I thought in my teacher brain, if I want to do vocabulary first, you just tell the students to do it first, even though it's at the end. But one instructor said, if I need to do vocabulary before the reading, then you need to put the vocabulary exercise at the beginning of the reading. And I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. So I had to go and I moved all the vocabulary exercises before the reading. But of course, because of the, confusion, I also made an instructor's guide and different pathways. If you want to focus only on the literature, here's which units, here's which readings to do. If you mostly want to focus on academic articles, here's the units and here's the things to do. So kind of more guidance, tools, extra resources that instructors could use. Step 9 is win a grant. At Pellissippi, we have the Tennessee Board of Regents, and every year they have like a OER grant competition, and instructors will win a grant and then they start making their OER. But that's kind of the opposite of what I did. It was finished pretty much and then I won a grant. The librarian that I worked with, who was really excited about my project, said, "Hey, we have an OER grant program. You should apply for it." And I won. The only condition was that I had to make it available online. And I only had it as a PDF. So guess what? I had to start over. Not really start over, but I had to convert everything that I had done in LaTeX to Pressbooks, which was okay because Pressbooks works a lot like WordPress, and I was already familiar with WordPress. It still took time to have to convert everything and move it over to Pressbooks. And then also, if I needed to make changes or, something was wrong, I needed to make some edits, I had to do it, make sure I did it in the Pressbooks online version and also the PDF LaTeX version. And that was a little bit of a pain. The 10th step, also, I don't know if people want to do, but it was a little bit helpful for me to have a pandemic, to have a published OER ready to go. It would made it, extremely easy for me as an instructor to pivot online. But I, suddenly what was it, like May 2020, I was getting so many emails, people, instructors, teachers from Florida, Vietnam, China, all different, states and countries, um, emailing me and saying, "Thank you for publishing this free, useful thing that, now that everybody has to go online, I can, easily pivot to and use this as a resource for my students." So that was maybe one of the silver linings. And I think that's the end of my 10-step process. um Even though it's been a while since I've worked on that, um there's still a lot of things that I want to do to update it. Now that in my role, I'm focused a lot on accessibility and I know a lot more about accessibility. Um, I tried to do some updates in Pressbooks to make it more like WCAG ADA compliant. As you may or may not know, at the time I was using Pressbooks, it was free. And now you have to have a subscription to be able to edit. So my Pressbooks version is done. So that's why I also am using LibreText. And that's where I want to start working on the accessibility piece there. I'm also really interested in H5P. I think a lot of times when people, or especially faculty, hear about OER, they just instantly think textbooks. I don't think any of my OER textbook materials actually came from other textbooks. I just used Creative Commons, news articles and stuff from the public domain, or photos that I took. But H5P, I think, is a good way to make OER more engaging. H5P is HTML5 package. It's basically like a little embedded interactive. It can be like a little quiz, it could be a presentation. It can do a lot of things, but they can also have Creative Commons licenses. So I would like to make some more H5Ps and put that in my book. OER always has sustainability concerns. As I mentioned, I'm pretty much, unless I want to pay like $15 a month, I'm kind of locked out of my Pressbooks. And even the last key here of like, OER sustainability, as you saw, I was constantly updating, changing my OER. And it's an iterative process and it should be, continuously improved. But at some point, it's like, what if I want to make a different OER? What if I want to make a new project? When is enough to, let go, let go of this OER textbook and let the Creative Commons licenses do their magic. Someone else can, update it and edit it as they want. And then, of course, um, I'm also very interested in AI, especially because my textbook is focused on advanced English. I would like to maybe make a version for beginner students or, intermediate level students. AI would be extremely helpful in helping me, kind of easily recreate those readability scores, but also keep track of vocabulary, um, and make sure that it is at a good readability for different levels of students. So those are exciting things I may or may not be able to do, but I think it's always good to think about the future, even when you're finished with an OER project. Okay, I talked way too much. I'm so glad I'm at question 2. You can put your answer in the chat or unmute. So if you have created an OER, what would be one takeaway you would like to share to someone who's just beginning their OER creation journey? And if there are none, it's okay. I have a few and we can have time to discuss. I'll go through these takeaways quickly. All right, I will wait. I'll keep an eye on chat, but I'll continue. So, and I think I only have 5 takeaways. So the first one is get to know a lot about copyright and Creative Commons licenses, because I think part of the misconception with OER is, here's the OER textbook. It's nice that it's free to use, but it doesn't perfectly match my class or what I need to do. But just, the ability to edit is so amazing, and just what you can do with copyright. I think also a lot of people don't know about automatic copyright. As soon as you make something, and faculty are making stuff from scratch all the time, as soon as you create it, you own it. You own the copyright, which also means you can relinquish some of those rights. You can't copyright ideas, facts, or concepts, only the expression of those ideas, facts, or concepts. Photos, if you take the picture, it is yours to, do whatever you want with. So take that into consideration when you're trying to make an OER. It was a good excuse to maybe go on a vacation to take pictures of statues. As I mentioned before, I think a lot of people view OER as just text or like textbook materials. I would like to see more OER that's interactive, like those H5P pieces, more images, videos. And also with textbooks, I know it's changing, but I feel like there are, a lot of OER textbooks or things that don't have an answer key or worksheets or, attached slides. So also think about making, those kind of ancillary items for your OER as well. Again, I didn't use any OER textbook materials. I mostly used Google to find my materials. In Google search, you can go to advanced search, and at the very bottom, it has usage rights. So you can change it to find only stuff that has a Creative Commons license. Of course, if you do find something of interest, confirm that it has that license, because internet searches are not perfect. But yeah, most of even my public domain stuff, a lot of it I found in Google searches or in the Gutenberg books. Yeah, it is time consuming. But my students really liked knowing about the process. They thought it was cool that their instructor was making a textbook and that they got to, give feedback on it. Student created OER, or like the renewable assignments is a big thing. Having students, be part of that creation process and have them publish something, I think is also really cool and may save you some time. And then lastly is, I need to focus more on the accessibility part. So like taking a look at OER through an equity lens, both for accessibility and perspective. Now that I'm working with accessibility, you may or may not know about the new Title II regulations from the ADA, that are requiring public institutions to become accessible, course materials be accessible. I expect that, a lot of instructors, are going to want to use an OER textbook, but they don't know if it's accessible or not. So I think that's really important. And, working with international students with my book and having a lot of like Greek influence or like Western culture, Western stuff, I felt kind of bad. Like I didn't want to push any kind of agenda. So I made it really clear in the instructor guides and with my students that, here's the story, here's what we can learn, but you get an opportunity to share your side. Do you have similar stories from your culture? Let's look at this, through another perspective. And that's it. We have unfortunately 2 minutes. If anyone has any questions or comments. But that's it from me. Yeah, I think I had a lot of fun working on this with my students. And even though I left that institution, other instructors are still using my book, even though I'm gone. That's the most important thing to me. I'm gone, but somebody else is still using it. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know about like you learn a lot about teaching practices and like pedagogy when you're creating the materials for students and not using someone else's. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Charity. I know everyone appreciated your time today, and we appreciate you taking the time to come and share this with us.
Thank you for having me.